Let's get started here. First, I want to extend a big thank you to everybody. We set another record of attendees this time around, and I really, really appreciate you all taking time out of your day and attending, and those that are listening to the recording later. I appreciate your willingness to listen to a recording of this. And no presentation of mine is complete without a shameless plug, and this time we have a bonus. I'm going to give you two shameless plugs. The first one is to remind you to please join us August 19th, same time, same channel, in August for our Q3 follow-up industry presentation. And then also, for those of you who go to the Automotive Body Parts Association meeting, I will be a speaker there. It is an actual in-person conference, September 21st through the 24th in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. So I look forward to seeing all of you after this incredibly long quarantine. So let's go over what we're going to talk about today. You know, we've been hearing a lot about part shortages, and so we're going to ask the question, are we truly in a parts pandemic? Secondly, we're going to look at new and used car sales trends and what that's going to mean for insurers and repairers in the short term. Then we're going to look at how electric vehicles have started to change the insurance industry. There's a great new study by the Highway Loss Data Institute out that draws some interesting conclusions for EVs versus their conventional counterparts. Then we're going to talk about the newest EVs to hit the market, and I'm going to give you a little personal news about that. And then go over our regular news update, just sort of highlighting things of interest to the collision repair industry and the insurance industry. And if you've been around my talks for a while, you know I am absolutely fascinated with Chinese knockoff vehicles and Chinese knockoff products. And we're going to go through the latest and greatest of those. And then, of course, end up with a quick question and answer period. So with that, let's roll on and hit the main question head on. Are we truly in a parts pandemic? You know, today's parts situation or vehicle production situation has been impacted by the shortage in microprocessors. And to give you a little background, this was triggered about a year ago when chip makers had really strong demand for consumer electronics during the first stages of the lockdown. People, of course, bought TVs and video consoles to prevent boredom during the first part of the lockdown, but as we transitioned them to work from home, additional smartphones, work phones, webcams, etc., all experienced strong demand. This is during the same time that the car manufacturers were shut down, and so, you know, they when the production started to ramp back up, they were at the back of the line. So these two pictures on the right, the top one is actually near my old hometown, Wentzville, Missouri, where the GM truck assembly plant is. You can see the truck and large van production there is being stockpiled as they assemble the vehicles, but not completely. They are waiting for the final microcompressor fuel management systems, ADAS equipment to be installed. The photo on the bottom is of the Kentucky Motor Speedway and the F-150 production, which has been idled now. They have about 2,400 vehicles waiting to get their microprocessor components installed. But, you know, recently we've also heard beyond this idea of just the idea of being around just the components, the microprocessor components. We've heard since early January this idea of collision parts also being shortages. So we're going to take a look at it in a couple of different ways. First, a little bit more on the part shortage update. You know, we think this will probably go through early 2022. We've heard that both Ford and GM, those examples I showed previously, they've decided to manufacture as much of the vehicle completely as possible and then retrofit the missing components as they become available. But the idea that there are shortages have been blamed on everything from the container ship that blocked the Suez Canal about a month ago, which makes you ask the question, how many collision parts are actually made in the Middle East, to the Port of Los Angeles being backed up. Now, below is a clip Friday of the situation for container ships at the Port of Los Angeles. There are 19 imports being unloaded. Every ship you see there in green is a container ship, and they are all green, so they are underpowered, meaning they're not moored waiting for an open berth. So the loading and unloading at Port of Los Angeles is going along very, very smoothly. What did happen is, if you recall, the really bad weather in Texas in early 2021 did impact, because of the shutdown of petroleum manufacturing, some seat foam injection plastic trim pieces as well. But that's really on new OEM assembly of vehicles, as is the microchip processors. The only thing, and I stress the only real information we had on collision shortages on the OE side, we haven't heard anything on the aftermarket side, is around the packaging plants. Two OEs have packaging plants in Mexico, mainly in Hermosillo, Mexico, and they are absolutely reporting that they had short staff due to a COVID outbreak in that area. So the parts were there, but they were not being able to be packaged and put in the boxes and shipped out. That is a very temporary situation, but we're not seeing really any big impact to that. Back a little bit to the outlook for microchips. Congress is passing the Chips for America Act. Now that does sound a little bit like a marketing campaign for Frito-Lay, but it is actually the idea that we're going to, through tax breaks and investment of capital, government capital, into the microprocessor assembly business, regain some of the market share we've lost to foreign countries that came in and have taken it over. You can see that in 1990, we were about 37% of microprocessors, and now we're down to 12%. So this is the idea that it's going to come back and come back big. Additionally, the companies like Intel have agreed to move to automobile microprocessing chips rather than traditional computer chips. The other thing we look at, to give you an idea of, is there any impact in part shortages for the US? And one of the first things we look at is, I look at our friends at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. If you've read Collision Week lately, you see that I write some of the content for that. And we see, when we compare Q1 2020 to Q1 2021, 1/10 of a day increase in repairable length of rental, which again is essentially flat. And as we look at PartsTrader internal data, we have hit a milestone to PartsTrader. We now process over $100 million in part sales a month through the PartsTrader platform. So one of the things we look at is quoted delivery times, and I've broken this down into two individual things. Now this is when the part is quoted, the delivery time is also quoted along with that. And the top chart looks at, in blue, all model years, because we wanted to look at the entire industry and see, is there anything across every model year that is impacting quoted delivery time? So if a parts distribution center says, you know, I don't have it there, I have to order it from one on the other side of the country, that of course impacts the quoted delivery time. We're really not seeing it. It's incredibly flat for all model years. The really interesting thing is, because I wanted to see if we were seeing anything on the OEM side. And for model year 2020 and 2021, we actually see a decrease in the quoted time, which is truly amazing. So as we look at that, we see there's really no impact. The second thing we want to look at, is the average number of parts quoted. And as we look at that, what that is every part that goes up, and the average estimate has 10 parts on it, and each one of these individual parts that are put up on the PartsTrader system get an average of, in April 2021, 8.1 quotes per part, according to the insurance company's parts policy. Now, again, for model years 20 and 2021, we see it's actually increased from 4.4 last April to 5.1. Now, we have added more OEM dealer groups to that, and that's one of the reasons we're seeing an increase in the number of quotes per part. The last metric I want to look at is the cost per part type. And what we've done is we've taken 5 parts categories and looked at the average part price per part category. Now let's start with the top. The top is OEM conquest. So the part came in as an aftermarket vendor hood, what have you, and was conquested to OE. That has remained fairly flat. We saw in the April or in the first quarter, sorry, of 2019, it was 263. In the first quarter of 2020, it was 257. It's risen a little bit up to 265 for conquested OE parts. Recycled parts, that brown bar below, very, very flat. The interesting one, and it kind of makes sense, is the blue one, which is OEM surplus. And you can see sort of that's the only one that has appreciably gone down in average value over time. And I think the reason that is primarily because we have had these car plants idled or reduced shift. So the sub-suppliers that are producing these headlamps and components that are not actively being shipped have surplus, and those are going through the OEM surplus. When you have a surplus of surplus, you get a lower average price. The bar in purple below is OEM, where there is no conquesting dollars associated with it. So those are the 6.5 out of 10 parts on the average estimate, where everyone is buying those brand new OE from the local parts department. And remember, on these OEM parts without conquest dollars, this is where our competitive tension means that you're going to pay a lower list price on the estimate than MSRP. Because the competitive tension, we have parts departments competing each other and driving the optimal part price. The last one in this sort of tan is aftermarket, and the really interesting thing is that has been the most competitive, as in consistent and flat and not increasing over time in value. So as we look at all of those components, we really don't see any impact on the collision industry through the middle of May when it comes to part shortages. Now, I mentioned that we were going to talk about new vehicle sales. This is really, really interesting because April is the second month in a row where the seasonally adjusted annual rate of sales has topped 18 million units. We normally, in normal times, sell about 16.5 to 17 million. We have accelerated that substantially, in part because stimulus checks are coming and people really, really want to go out and spend that money. They're cooped up. They want to get out and get a new car. The interesting thing, though, is we know from our microchip discussion is what happens now when we run out of cars. To give you an example, Toyota, again, the best-selling nameplate in the United States, their volume in April 2021 jumped 183% from April of 2020, again, the start of lockdown last year, with the overall Toyota brand up 183% as well, Lexus up 177%, and they all have set April records, not just in comparison to last year being the start of the lockdown, but the highest sales record for new Toyotas in Toyota Motor Sales history in the US. Now, the little dark cloud around this silver lining is that we're starting to see a really, really lean inventory. You can see that the inventory here is down 46% from April of 2020, and that Toyota is saying their light truck division, which includes SUVs, has only a 19-day supply. So I think we're going to be in a situation that is unique where we have this incredible demand, and because of the microchips, they're going to have to either delay delivery or figure out some way to do it. Now, it's also a seller's market in used car sales. Usually when you have very strong new car sales, you have weak used car sales. But this is the unique dichotomy here. We have both very strong new car sales, but the steam is kind of running out because inventory is running out. And we have very, very strong used car sales because people are saying, look, if I can't get exactly what I want on the new car lot, I'm going to see what I can find on the used car lot. So franchise used car dealers have about 31 days supply, and independent used car dealers have about 34 days supply. To give you a barometer, that's about 2/3 what they normally have. They usually have around 45 days supply to bring them through the summer months, and it's really, really far down. The interesting thing is that the average used car transaction price is $21,343, which is 13% higher from the same week a year ago. The interesting thing, if you have time and are a little bored, you can go to Carvana or Vroom and put in your information for your car and get one of those no obligation quotes, and I bet you'll be surprised. I did this a couple of weekends ago, and the offer came back at $2,400 more than I bought my car for a year ago. But the interesting impact on collision repairs and the insurance industry is that robust used car sales means that the threshold to replace that vehicle is going to be higher. So the total loss threshold is going to be higher, potentially meaning more repairable vehicles, which is actually good across the board. It's good for repairs because it'll keep your techs busy. It's actually good for insurers because overall the customer satisfaction, as we know from JD Power, is higher in a repairable vehicle incident than it is in a total loss incident. The flip side of that is when the car does total, it's going to be a higher settlement value, potentially more difficult to settle. And then, of course, finding a replacement vehicle for that vehicle owner faced with that challenge is going to be interesting. Now, overall, vehicle miles traveled really, really increased, obviously, from the start of the lockdown. And then, of course, nothing ever operates in a vacuum. And we had the Colonial pipeline hack a couple of weeks ago. To give you an idea of what that really is, the Colonial pipeline is the largest pipeline system in the US for refined gasoline. This is not raw crude. This is refined fuel going through two tubes, 5,500 miles long. And you can see the start and the end of that pipeline. Now, with the hack taking them offline for a few days, that did temporarily interrupt supply. You saw some reports of gas lines and people hoarding fuel in unapproved containers, but that is a very, very temporary thing. As we look at the summer, traditionally when our fuel consumption is the highest, the National Tank Truck Carriers Association has said, hey, we're worried that there's a shortage of drivers. Now, AAA, its spokesman, said, look, there isn't a shortage of the gas supply, it's a shortage of the delivery drivers driving the trucks, and that can be resolved through overtime and hiring of additional drivers. Of course, that overtime comes at an additional cost, so we're probably going to see that go into the gas pump prices during the summer, and we usually see a normal spike in the summer because of higher consumption, so we're going to see an even steeper hike in average fuel prices. And while we're on the wonderful subjects of shortages, there is an international shortage of natural rubber. Two causes to this. The supply globally was already running short. There was a devastating leaf disease in tropical countries that are big rubber producers. China apparently saw this very early on and started stockpiling the raw rubber material from the plants early on. So we are seeing an initial shortage, and most people say, well, you can just have synthetic rubber in its place. You can, but there are components, especially automobile tires, where natural rubber, vulcanized rubber, is actually the superior product. So is that going to impact our industry? I would not want to be an OEM car manufacturer now. As soon as I get finished with one shortage around microchips, I've got a deal now with potentially not putting spare tires, etc., for those small vehicles that have full-size spare tires. So it's going to be an interesting summer into the fall if you're a car producer. Now, full electric vehicles, we talked about them in our last update, and I gave you kind of a rundown of some of the vast number of traditional manufacturers like Mercedes that are very aggressively launching EVs into the car park. Now, they're still only less than 1% of the car park, but they're growing very, very rapidly. And the Highway Loss Data Institute did a study over the last few years, which was really interesting. And they've taken a unique look at it, because what they've done, and they've done this type of study where they have a vehicle equipped with ADAS versus its counterpart without, to get sort of a pure run of what are the differences. In this case, they've taken full EVs that have a traditional counterpart. So obviously that calls out Tesla, because there is no traditional gasoline powered Tesla. And some people may know that Rich Benoit, YouTuber for Rich's Rebuilds, is actually transplanting an LS3 into a Tesla Model S, leaving the question, why on earth would you do that? But what they have found is, based on Carfax data, EVs are traditionally driven about 39% fewer miles per day. But even when they adjusted for that difference in mileage, they found a substantially lower claim frequency and a tiny bit higher claim severity. So as we look in the breakdown, here are the vehicles that were surveyed. Again, these are not in the electric series, because these are older technology. And I'll pick on the Volkswagen. The VW e-Golf only has a range of about 85 miles. So it's not really a practical substitute for a gasoline-powered vehicle with that small of a range. But it does point out that a few of these vehicles were sold. And when controlling for mileage, the frequency in collision was actually lower by 20%. And for third-party property damage liability, the frequency of claim made was down by 17%. Really interesting that that's the way that vehicle is adjusted. It could go to the demographic of the driver. Initially, we saw with Priuses that the losses were lower because the demographic makeup of the initial Prius owner was different. And then when gas prices spiked, you saw that more people were jumping in for the mileage benefits, and it slowly normalized so that the Prius at the time was getting about the same accident frequency as the conventional Toyota Corolla. The really interesting thing is that claim severity, again, not controlled for mileage in this study, is 1% higher when it comes to collision and 3% higher when it comes to property damage. Really opening to hearing what your thoughts are on this. There's very few components that are different, so there shouldn't really be a difference in collision. The only thing is there's a slight difference in gross vehicle weight with the electric versus the gasoline, with the electric traditionally being slightly heavier. So we can discuss that in our Q&A section. I mentioned that we're going to talk about some of the new electric vehicles. Last time we discussed Mercedes and their big launch. This is the Subaru's first EV, and because it's a Subaru, it will come in with dual electric motors and all-wheel drive because it's a Subaru. And it is called the Solterra, and it is advertised as having a competitive driving range. And competitive in today's world means it's about 250 miles total driving range. Now, it is very early because it's going to be launched next summer, but they haven't released any details on it. And if you're looking at this thing saying, that really does look like a Toyota, kind of like a RAV4, you're not wrong. It is the identical car to the Toyota BZ4X. Here's the BZ4X. It is just basically a nameplate change between the two vehicles. Very similar in the way that the Toyota Scion F86 and the Subaru BRZ were. This is what's happening with Subaru as they look to get into a new market, they usually partner with Toyota. Volkswagen also is very aggressively launching their first EV, the ID.4. You remember the now known as an April Fool's joke that they were changing it to Volts, V-O-L-T-S wagon. That was a pretty interesting marketing gimmick and not a great April Fool's joke, but anyway, that's where we're at. The really interesting thing is that the demand for this vehicle has been so strong that the first edition launch, which is only available in two-wheel drive with a very specific package arrangement, comes in at $43,995 base price before a $7,500 national tax credit. That vehicle has already been sold out. And the reason I bring it up is that the vehicle on the right, the ID Pro, its availability is starting in summer of 2021. I reserved mine a month ago, and my build date is late October in Zwickau, Germany. So the demand is very, very strong for this ID.4 vehicle. And for those of you who remember, this will be vehicle number 48 for me. Little bit of news on the airbag front. GM has announced an investigation into, well, along with NHTSA, into 750,000 current model and 2021 GM vehicles, mainly trucks, but also in the Cadillac range for the CT4, 5, and XT4. So it's basically every Cadillac. And this is a non-functioning or a malfunctioning airbag, late deployment or no deployment, when sensors believed it should have deployed. This could potentially be a very big recall. It is very early in the process. It's, you know, NHTSA has just opened up an investigation, so we'll see where it leads. Also on recalls, this is kind of an interesting one. Ford is recalling 617,026 through 2019 Ford Explorers. You can see little clip pin number 3 in the diagram there is a plastic pin that fails, and at high speeds, that plastic roof cap, number 7, flies off into traffic. No injuries reported. Don't know the extent of the number of accidents caused by that, but that should be a fairly easy fix. And as promised, we're going to get into the Chinese knockoffs. The Chinese knockoffs, you know, I am amazed at this market. I am a connoisseur of wine and of Penfold's Bin 369, and this is the Chinese knockoff of one of my favorite Cabernet Shiraz blends. It's the Benford's VIP 389 or 398. You might all want to have a drink as we go on to these next ones, because the Chinese are now knocking off Halloween costumes. Here's our first one. Where's the stripey dude? And the second one, Hermione Grinder, top student at Chagborts. I'm just gonna let that one sit there for a second. Amazing. But let's take a look at this beauty. You'd say, hey, well, that's obviously a Ford F-150 double cab. In fact, it is not. It is the Foton Big General. This is interesting because while it is a pure knockoff of the full-size F-150, because it's Chinese made and made for that population, that street size, it is about the size of the new Ford Ranger pickup. So it looks just like an F-150, but the Big General is actually small. And let's take look at this beautiful Porsche Macan. This is not actually a Porsche Macan. This is the knockoff. This is the Zotia model, and you can see interior and exterior is very, very close. The only thing they have done is taken the analog clock from the previous Porsches very at home in the Porsche Panamera and mounted it on the dashboard of a very good looking, high quality looking knockoff Porsche. I would love to go to mainland China and drive one of these vehicles one of these days. So I'll put that on my bucket list. And last, you look at this and say, well, okay, what kind of car is that? Well, the obvious response is, my gosh, that looks like a Beetle. In fact, it looks even more retro, in my opinion, than some of the other VW authorized products we've seen in the past. So this is really, really an interesting vehicle, but this is not, in fact, a Beetle. It is the Great Wall Motors Punk Cat. Love that name. Full electric vehicle. VW actually is very concerned. You can tell that as soon as you look at that vehicle, it evokes the idea of VW's Beetle, that is intellectual property. They have, however, looked at Land Rover, the only successful company to sue a Chinese manufacturer, same one, Great Wall Motors, and be successful. All of the other suits that were brought by BMW and some of the other manufacturers have been unsuccessful. So yeah, we'll see if VW launches the long, difficult fight on intellectual property that has to be litigated in China. And if you're saying, well, you know, I like the Punkat, I like retro vehicles, I'm not ready for a full EV, how about the Songsan Dolphin SS plug-in hybrid? There you go. Look at that thing. Yeah. So this apparently has a 100-mile range, very retro looking, a little bit wrong on the dimensions. No information on the price, but you can tell this is Songsan's retro marketing. They put a Harley in the background and an old 50 styles American gas pump, but interesting stuff as these things continue. And even the Chinese are getting the idea that EVs are the wave of the future. So we see two of their knockoffs being EV and hybrid. And with that, I wanted to take this time to really open it up for questions. So here we go. Please type in your questions as Blake has asked, and I will read them and answer them as we go.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Greg. We'll give everyone a few minutes to type those questions in. We've also got a few that have been emailed in as well. So we'll give everyone a little bit to do that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Blake, you want to start with some of the emailed questions?
Yeah, so this is one that we received. Let me pull this up. So this one is related to shops in this sort of new environment. It says, as vehicles become more and more like computers on wheels, and we move towards EVs with less moving parts, i.e. the internal combustion engine, how do you see the repair shop landscape changing? How will the role of the mechanic shift in the coming years?
That's a great question. For the traditional dealership that offers mechanical service, it's going to be limited. You still have brakes, you still have wheel bearings, tires, etc. But you look at electric motors, they do not have a conventional deterioration lifespan like combustion engines. There is no traditional transmission. There is still components like HVAC, which is, you know, it either works or it really doesn't. There's not traditional servicing other than cleaning out the drain pipe. So it's going to be a reduced frequency of repair for the vehicle owner. So what you're going to see in the future on the service drive and the independent mechanical side is servicing those components like brake systems, like HVAC and steering components that as they wear, but those are going to be much, much higher wear thresholds, because you really don't get, for example, tie rod ends and ball joints deteriorating till north of 100,000 miles. So it is going to be a little bit reduced in the frequency of service as we think of it, as oil change and tune-up. Those are going to go away, obviously. On the collision repair side, I think we have to be in a position now as the industry where we are going to have additional training so we understand what's going to happen when we disassemble the vehicle. Now, obviously, there's been training with hybrids around disconnecting the power source, the precautions with welding, the precautions with cutting, how they could impact getting that battery floor. Those are all going to be training issues that good organizations like ICAR, the OEs, are going to step up and educate, but that education is going to come at a cost to the collision repair.
Awesome. All right. Well, if anyone else has any questions, there is a question box that you can drop those into. If anybody can't find that, there's also a chat that you can ask questions in as well. So we'll give everyone a few more minutes to roll in, but no more as of now.
Okay. Randy, also, I wanted to thank you. You sent me a note in the chat earlier on. I really appreciate it. I enjoy being back doing these. And I've missed them as well, doing these industry updates, and I'm very happy to be back and love getting back in the groove of giving these every quarter. All right. Folks, if you do have any questions, again, Blake, let me reach out. We haven't had any additional questions.
No, not right now. I apologize.
All right. So what I will do is, as always, you can reach me with your individual questions at greg.horn@partstrader.com. Very easy to remember. And with that, I look forward to meeting all again August 19th. And then also, if you're able to make it to the Auto Body Parts Association meeting in person, live in Nashville, September 21st to 24th, I would greatly enjoy seeing you all in person there. And with that, thank you, Jessica. Just a good well wish. Thank you. I appreciate it. She gave me some great kudos there that she enjoyed the presentation. Again, look forward to seeing you around the industry. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.